Namaste. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom. Ni hao. Buenos dias. Deseche. Aquaba. Welcome. What up, though? This is Cafe Melange. We got to come up with a different name for this joint because it ain't a cafe at this point. It's a lecture, talk, some kind of something. So, anyways, it is what it is. And it's at Genti Siete, somewhere around there, I think, like 27, something like that. We up there. Well, that means half a year at this point. um, the topic for today is ethocracy. So, um, delve into it. So, what do we mean by ethocracy? Well, we have democracy, meaning quote unquote rule of the people. We've got monarchy, uh, which is different from monarchy. I got too many jokes because that's not even what I was thinking about. The one I'm thinking about is oligarchy, which means, well, I'll do monarchy. Monarchy meaning the rule of a monarch, a king, queen, a potentate, individual, mono. And then we got rain at the moment. How you doing, Uncle? All right. We got it was clear. Now it's drizzle, and that changes the parameters of the recording at the moment. So yeah, humor is less appreciated by additional elements as well. Anyways, that's the monarchy. Then we got the oligarchy, and the joke for the oligarchy is that it is a rule of Man United, aka ruled by the gaffer Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. That's a football joke. Anyways, uh, there are all these different ways of methodologies of rule, how decisions are made, how a society, a nation, a tribe is governed, government. So with autocracy, we're talking about the rule of ethics, or rule by ethics. And so, quite simply, it's just a matter of um, the principles being the sovereignty, principles being the king, queen, principles being the methodology of uh, attaining, recognizing, abiding by authority within society. And the effective mechanics of ethocracy is when people, when an individual has the inclination to commit to an increasingly stringent ethical practice, an ethical vow, then that individual is qualifies for uh, an increased amount of authority within society. And so rather than money or popularity or power, military power, whatever, it's ethics. And the thing is, anybody can do it. Anybody can say, okay, I'm going to abide by these ethics. The ethical vow might be for the period of the duration of the period where the period of the duration of the office being held, a year or two. It might be for life. It depends upon what the society determines. But that's just the basic fundamental mechanics of it. When people decide to commit to an ethical principle or ethical discipline, um, then that individual and those individuals are qualified to hold authority, recognized authority within government, and the increasingly ascended position of authority within society, the increasingly stringent the ethical discipline required for that office. Uh, so with that also comes increasing accountability for violations of those ethical uh, principles and ethical discipline. So that's the basic gist of it. Now, obviously, there are a whole lot of details that go into how a government is constructed and how it runs, methodologies, and additionally. So, so the consideration is just the idea of ethics being the methodology of authority within society, uh, and that's the construct. We can go into the culture of like the pragmatics of how it works, but the culture is like increasingly organic and it's per um, the discretion of the people, the society, the conditions as well. Uh, but here are some like characteristics of the culture within an ethocracy. First of all, less individualistic. And I say first of all because I'm speaking from a societal experience, so where individualism, personal liberty is extremely tightly held. And so one of the first things to recognize in autocracy is individualism is not the most important thing. It's not the greatest thing. It is the principles, the ethics. And so when there is a pervasive culture of ethics and recognized ethics, there's less concern about violations towards individuals' rights or well-being because it's anti-ethical. Um, and so it's a violation of the societal rules, not because necessarily it's a violation against an individual, but because it's a violation of the ethics, which the ethics include the well-being of individuals. So it's an important thing to recognize because the slippery slope of um, personal liberty and individualism is an indulgence, an intoxication of self-absorption and ego, and additionally, and even a counterculture of gripe, and additionally predicated upon violation of individual liberty, without necessarily those violations of individual liberty being even relevant. Um, so, anyways, ethics, letting go of the notion of individualism, the fierce individualism, and focusing on the ethics and uh, cooperating accordingly. And I do have notes for today because there's some involved stuff here. So it's a lot of ideas. Um, so with that also comes in that culture an increased amount of shared interest, shared a collective interest in the well-being of society. And so one of the paradoxes of a society based on individualism is that it tends to be polarizing. It tends to be separatist. People forming eventually different factions based upon simply promoting the individual interest and the collective um, um, minority interest within society, and so there's less of a strong cohesion amongst the aggregate of society because um, the premise of society is individualism. So it undoes itself. So within an ethocracy, there is a recognized forefront emphasis on the collective well-being because that's part of the ethics, but it's also part of the efficacy in the functioning of the ethics. And so, and we can see evidence that in a number of nations around the earth, around a number of societies and cultures. Um, so, anyways, that's an additional part of the additional component of the culture. Now, that being said, it ain't communism. It's not a matter of foregoing all individual possessions of this and the other for the sake of a state and the however chosen or ascended despots within the state that make the decisions accordingly. There's still propensity for individual um, possessions or property, quote unquote. And no, it's difficult for me to use that word. Um, but also rights and additionally, and even motivations along those lines as well. But it's also within moderation and within the greater consideration and championing of the ethics that uh, strengthen and heal society. Another component of the culture of ethocracy is smaller size. The, 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 the point is not to become a behemoth entity and take over others, this, that, and the other. The, the, uh, the emphasis is in harmony and well-being and recognizing that um, part of the efficacy of society and the functioning of society is relationships. And to have effective relationships, you got to know each other and be able to talk with each other, know how to talk with each other, know how to argue with each other, and still agree with each other. And so that takes time, that takes effort, it takes continual interaction. And it's very difficult to do that with a billion people. It's difficult to do that with a million people. It's difficult to do that with 1,000 people, and additionally, but the the significant the significant consideration with ethocracy is smaller size, modesty. And through that modesty, a strengthening of the relationships and the cohesion within society. So again, that helps to facilitate the communication and agreement, reconciliation, and additionally, um, and actually also the decision making, which I intend to get into in a minute as we get the drizzle drizzle. And also with the smaller size, there's direct involvement. One of the misnomers about democracy is the perception of it just being one voting once a year or once every 4 years. Democracy, as it's slated to be, is direct, continual, regular engagement within the decision making of the political entity, the political collective. And so, whilst that seems to be somewhat lost within Western um, experience, the consideration with and the guidance within ethocracy is that it's part of the part and parcel of the joint. Uh, in one way or another. And then again, that it is increasingly conducive to have that and to be aware of that and to honor that when there's smaller sizes and there's increased accessibility and efficacy. Like by efficacy in this manner, I mean meaning that when somebody goes to a town hall meeting, that the conversation and the the input that a person goes, even just attending and listening, leads directly to salient policies and conditions that are decided within the government, rather than like all the steps and bureaucratic processes and campaigns and everything that eventually might lead to a policy sometime later. So that's another part of the culture is the smaller size and also direct involvement. And one other component of the culture, there are additional components, but these are the ones I mentioned for the moment. An additional component is transparency. And so just like I mentioned before, in terms of the absence of, or I should say, the less emphasis in individualism, that also goes towards the perception or the presumption of privacy, particularly amongst the ascension of the political leadership. So, as an individual takes the ethical vows to assume higher positions within the authoritative structure of autocracy, um, the individual also recognizes the individual's behaviors increasingly availed to the public. And that might be recognized in contemporary experiences, but it's increasingly accepted and expected and honored within an ethocracy. And so, particularly because the person's behavior is being held accountable and to certain scrutiny. So there's just a culture of transparency and increased transparency and ready transparency, being upfront about things. Um, so those are some of the components of culture within an autocracy. Again, it ain't the definitive rule about how the nature of an autocracy, but it's part of the culture that is conducive to and from within about an autocracy. Yeah, it's just amount of dribble just to stay out, but it's picking up a little bit. Ha ha ha. So challenge. We might have to do relocation. Um, all right, so I'll keep going though. See if I can get this done expediently with minimal precipitation. I was trying to do a lean to with the keyboard, but that ain't it. All right, so another consideration with, actually, I'm going to finish the segment and then find a drier spot because it's getting misty in this joint. So another component is political decision making. Um, and the predominant methodology within ethocracy and political decision making is consensus building. Um, and again, consensus is probably one of the most honest ways of making decisions and amongst a collective that accounts for everybody's interests. Um, the absence of factions, and additionally, but there are a lot of mechanics and protocols that are prudent when practicing consensus. And a culture, are we blowing up on the phone too? All right, let me hold up on this. Consensus building is increasingly conducive to autocracy. The other thing is delegation. making decisions in group consensus wise, but then delegating to committees, individuals to do actual project and campaign and additional implementation of, of endeavors. So I'm gonna pause right here.